It wasn't a slam. A slam would have been dramatic, right? Maybe even, I don't know, a relief. But no, this was something else. Something so much quieter and honestly 1,000 times more devastating. So, yeah, there I was, 28 years old, just standing in the doorway of our apartment, watching the taillights of her car get smaller and smaller until they just vanished. And that sounds, it was just this soft, resigned click. You know, it was like the final period at the end of a sentence I'd been messing up for years. The end. Look, there's no other way to put it. I had screwed up, big time, in a way that felt absolutely permanent. And that feeling of regret, man, it was immediate and just totally overwhelming. And that feeling, that deep, crushing regret, that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. We're talking about the wisdom of regret. We're going to unpack this idea that this powerful, painful emotion isn't actually something to run from, but maybe, just maybe, something to understand and even embrace. Okay, so first things first, let's tackle a myth that our culture is absolutely obsessed with, this whole idea of living with no regrets. I mean, you've seen it everywhere, right? On one hand, you've got this cultural mantra, this tattoo-worthy phrase, no regrets. Everything happens for a reason. But then on the other hand, there's the private reality for, well, most of us. That gut punch of a feeling at 3 a.m. where you're just thinking, what on earth was I doing? And the gap between those two, it can feel like a canyon. And this really gets to the core of the issue. Pretending you have no regrets doesn't make you enlightened or spiritually evolved. It just makes you delusional. It's a form of self-deception. This constant pressure to rebrand every single mistake as some kind of cosmic blessing, that's what people call toxic positivity. And here's the truth. Sometimes a mistake is just a mistake, and that's okay. So for me, the big shift, my personal turning point, came from a conversation I had at a wedding. It was just one moment that completely changed how I saw my past. My friend Marcus said this to me, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. He said, "You know the difference between regret and wisdom? Regret is when you feel bad about the past. Wisdom is when you feel bad about the past and you use it to make different choices." It wasn't about getting rid of the bad feeling. It was about adding an action to it. And wow, did that rewire my brain. Suddenly, it was like I had permission to actually feel the pain of my mistake, but also see a way forward. Regret and growth, they weren't enemies. They were partners. Okay, so that's a nice idea, right? But how do we make it practical? How do you actually take this awful, painful feeling and turn it into something useful? Let's break it down. So here's the fundamental shift in thinking. Regret is not the enemy. Denial is. Think of regret like a compass needle that's spinning. It's just data. It's your own mind flagging a moment where your actions didn't line up with your values. And if you ignore that signal, well, you're probably just going to get lost again. All right, so there's actually a super clear 4-step process for this. Step 1. You have to name the regret. And I mean specifically. No vague stuff like, I messed up the relationship. No, get specific. Step 2. Identify the pattern. You can't change what happened, but you sure as hell can identify the behavior that got you there. Step 3, and this one is so important. Ask yourself why. What were you trying to protect? 9 times out of 10, it was your ego or your comfort zone. And finally, step 4, honor the lesson by actually changing. The best apology you can give yourself or anyone else is different behavior. This whole thing really boils down to taking responsibility. There's a term in psychology for it, having an internal locus of control. All that means is believing that you are the primary driver of your own life. You're the one in the driver's seat, and yeah, that means you get to celebrate the wins, but you also have to own the crashes. And this is maybe the most important distinction we're going to talk about today. On one side, you have shame. Shame is toxic. It says, I am bad. It takes a mistake and makes it your entire identity. But regret, healthy, transformative regret, it creates space. It says, I did something bad. See the difference? I am bad versus I did something bad. One is a life sentence, the other is a learning opportunity. So what happens when you really start to live this way? Well, something amazing happens. You start to see your past not as this big, embarrassing secret, but as the actual foundation of the person you've become. So fast forward a bit, I'm on a first date with a woman named Alina who would later become my wife. And she says this to me. It just completely flipped my entire worldview on its head. What if regret wasn't a sign that you failed? What if it was a sign that you had actually lived, that you had risked something real?
And really, that's the whole point, isn't it? You can only regret the chances you actually took. Every single regret is like a scar that proves you were brave enough to step into the arena in the first place, even if you got knocked down.
So, years later, Elena and I are standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, the exact same spot I'd visited years before with my ex. She knew the whole story, of course, and she turns to me and asks the million-dollar question, do you wish you'd done it differently?
And my answer was no. And not for some cheesy everything happens for a reason Hallmark card reason. It was no because the person standing there with her, the person I had become, was forged in the fire of processing that mistake. I could hold both feelings at the same time, deep regret for what I did back then and deep gratitude for the life it eventually led me to. That ability to hold both the pain and the gratitude at once, that's what integration is.
All right, so let's bring this all back to you. How can we apply this to our own lives? Because here is the ultimate takeaway from all of this. The piece that you're looking for, it's not in trying to erase your past. It's in integrating it. You can't become a whole person by chopping off the parts of your story you don't like. Real, true peace comes from owning all of it, the good, the bad, and the regret. So that leads me to a final question. Just for you to think about. What is the regret that you're not letting yourself feel? What's that one mistake you keep trying to spin as some kind of beautiful lesson because admitting that you just wish it hadn't happened feels too painful? Because I promise you, that feeling, it's not your enemy. It's a signal. It's data. And it might just be the single most powerful tool you have to build the future you actually want. It's time to turn that regret into wisdom.